policy may be set top down, but innovation is bottoms up, as we both know. And we have to find ways to take those individuals that are in most impacted job sets, not by job replacement of technology, but by task augmentation of technology. We have to take those people and plug them into the process of redesigning where we go. As we look at future training programs and other things, we might have top to bottom deployments of that, but the real utilization of it and real diffusion of that has to be bottoms up.
Welcome to the Humanity Code Conversations. I'm Heidi Lawrenson, and today we'll explore another perspective on intentionally shaping the future with AI, where our technology amplifies our shared humanity rather than diminishes it. Welcome to the Humanity Code Conversations. I'm thrilled to have with us today a good friend, status quo disruptor, and innovator extraordinaire, Dustin Heisler. Dustin is president of eRepublic, the nation's leading media and intelligence company for the state and local government markets. So that means states, cities, towns, and villages. For decades now, Dustin's been pushing the edges of innovation in governments, not something government is known for, helping them leverage technology to serve their communities better. He did this in-house as Chief Information Officer and Assistant City Manager of Manor, Texas, where at that time he was named one of the nation's top 25 doers, dreamers, and drivers by government technology, as well as visionary tech companies like Spigot, which is the leader in crowdsourced innovation, and when I happened to first meet Dustin. As the launchpad leading to his current role as president at eRepublic, Dustin previously was the company's Chief Innovation Officer, where he spearheaded many transformative initiatives, including the launch of the Center for Public Sector AI at the end of last year. He's been a thought leader and expert in government's use of AI before it was even cool. So Dustin, not surprisingly, is a sought-after speaker and advisor. He's worked with universities around the globe on incubating next-generation technologies in government, including the Persuasive Technology Lab at Stanford and the University of Trento in Italy. He was selected as an Eisenhower Fellow in 2019, which was spent in China, and a Business Transformation 150 leader by Constellation Research. Dustin's work is shaping not just the future of government technology, but the future of government, making public services more efficient, transparent, and community enriching. And he's a thoughtful human, so I know he'll have some insights to help us drive the Humanity Code mission forward. So welcome, Dustin.
Thanks, Heidi. Always great to see you, and honored to, be a guest on your amazing Humanity Code podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm so delighted that you're here. So you have been at the forefront of GovTech innovation for years. And back in 2022, you described that moment as the App Store moment for government technology, where there was, it was kind of like a big shift at that time, which was one of the most insightful descriptions of GovTech I felt at that time. How would you define the current moment in GovTech, especially in light of the of AI and the rapid advancements? What moment is it now?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, back at that moment, we were seeing, GovTech for the longest time was an industry of industries. It was this industrial complex, though, that you were kind of locked into what you had. And so we started to see, some colliding forces that enabled the App Store moment, which is, a parallel to what we saw with the iPhone App Store, a year after its release. Now, all of a sudden, you could extend its functionality. You could download multiple versions of the calculator app and the flashlight app and all these other things, but you could extend what you had and extend its potential. And GovTech went through a very similar transition, throughout the pandemic and after that. And I think what we're seeing now is AI kind of come in, and as, Mark Andreessen said, software is eating the world, but now AI is eating software. And so it's kind of coming in and abstracting and embedding itself into some of these things. And it's, to me, providing an incredible opportunity for those jurisdictions that are leaning into it, not to replace people, not to replace the way that we deliver services, but to augment it. Because one of the biggest challenges right now in the public sector is workforce related. We don't have enough people to do what needs to be done. The needs are growing, and we need to find ways to give people more tools on their tool belt. And I think AI is a great tool to augment the human potential, not to replace the human capital.
So as I mentioned, most people don't think of interactions with the government as bleeding edge, but we're already seeing some fascinating applications of AI in state and local governments, including some very unsexy use cases like Detroit and Macomb County using AI drones to inspect sewers. What are some of the beneficial AI applications that really stand out for you, and how are they transforming government?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think, the chatbot on your website will suck less now with generative AI, but I think there's a lot more that goes into it, right? When you think about it, even outside of the use cases themselves, I kind of like to look at it in three lenses. AI use cases have the ability to augment people, to augment knowledge, and to augment experiences. And so from a people standpoint, this is where we're seeing a lot of the ability for pre-qualification to be done through, more intelligent chatbots, the ability to, give people more personalized templates that they can reply, to, different requests that they're getting in, the ability to leverage it for, translation and much more, human oriented translation that can also now bring in reading level and other things that weren't possible before. From a knowledge standpoint, so much institutional knowledge leaves government, right? We have people that kind of come in. The whole employment model of the public sector is changing. And, the 30-year public servant is no longer the norm from a career standpoint. And so you have new generational bands that come in and they do what I call tours of duty. They'll stay in the public sector for a little bit of time. They might bounce to the private sector. They might start a social benefit corporation to try to help fix whatever the frustration was when they were in government. But all of that knowledge leaves. And so I think there's a huge capability for AI to help augment and make that knowledge accessible. And, it's not just going to be an open data repository anymore, but you're going to have, data that's conversational. And it's not just for citizen benefit, but also for the employees, for the new employees, the, legacy employees, the elected officials. Everybody can kind of leverage that same base of knowledge. And I think the third kind of aspect is the experience side. And the way that we interact with government is changing. And whether agencies like it or not, their website is no longer going to be the front door of those interactions. What is the website in a world where AI has, replaced that? And maybe I, go and I search and I'm able to complete the services without having to go to a specific place at a specific time and remember my login and all of those other things that go along with it. Now, there's a lot of foundation work that has to take place there, but I kind of like to look at it in those three bends, and we're seeing incredible experimentation across the board. I mean, I think we're seeing, like states like New Jersey, from an employment standpoint, are focusing on helping their state employees understand how to use Gen AI, and they've developed training and they've developed a sandbox and they have their own state bot. You have people like the state of Oklahoma that's kind of taken that to another level, and they're like, no, we want to train our people, our constituents, our workers on this technology. So they partnered with companies like Google to bring that in. And then you just have a ton of work that's happening in these systems of record. Every system of record out there, whether it's your CRM or your ERP or whatever it might be, is looking at embedding AI into that delivery. So it's not a standalone thing that you're going to have to worry about going to, but it's just something that's a part of your experience every day as an employee, as a constituent, as a user of the technology. So I think, that back to that, AI eating software component, it's very rapidly entering the equation as an embedded aspect of the way that we access, services.
I love that governments aren't putting their head in the sand, but they're actually creating sandboxes. So that's amazing. How does all that translate to reimagining community life? Like what, if you were to paint a vision of what community life could be in government, resident interactions and all of that, what could that?
I think it can truly humanize the nature of government. I mean, think about how government agencies communicate at scale today. Everything is a template, and it's got first name in brackets, followed by comma, followed by, a bunch of stock text with replace, key phrases here. That's not engaging constituents, and that's not personalized. But what if you had the ability to hyper engage and hyper personalize an experience to someone based on their persona, their unique attributes, their interests, those types of things? And, for the first time, that level of technology that may have been available in the enterprise is now available for even a small city that has 500 people, where you can hyper personalize the ability for them to consume, to understand legislation and ordinances and laws, to be able to have communication templates that are translated into their language. And maybe I like the Axio Smart Brevity format, for example. So that would be the first thing that I would say, okay, I want smart brevity for all of my government communications from this point forward. Give me the bullet points, the net. I don't want all of the other legalese. So, you have the ability to start to customize that. And I think that lowers the barrier of then participating, because instead of me having to be an expert in that, it democratizes access to knowledge and allows me to participate in a way that I understand, in a way that I might feel more comfortable engaging. I think there's a lot of other things we have to do to kind of ensure that it's not just a read privileges, but that it's a read-write privilege where we have the ability to capture that output from the constituent that may voice something back that doesn't fit the exact model of how we may have designed the system, but that, ultimately can be very valuable as we look at how we navigate those services. So I think service delivery can be more personalized. People can understand the construct of government rules and regulations and laws much better. I think it will be far less disruptive when we go through election cycles, right? And you have new, electoral members that are coming in that may not understand all of the reasons why certain decisions were made in certain ways. Now we can start to break down that, and we just basically democratize knowledge and make it accessible to everyone, internal and external.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned too, it can democratize across jurisdiction sizes. So the smallest agencies can be as forward thinking as the big ones.
And it could be a leapfrog potential. I mean, look at like what happened with fiber in the ground. I mean, as we looked at all of these rural areas that were competing for internet access, and it was like, well, we'll never have the economics of being able to light up fiber to the home. And then all of a sudden along came Starlink, and along came, these next gen wireless technologies that started to make parts of rural America and parts of the world accessible that didn't have access before. It actually allowed them to kind of leapfrog some of the physical requirements for that in the ground, infrastructure. And I think some of the smaller cities are actually going to have a leapfrog opportunity as well, where maybe they don't have as much legacy technology or what we call technical debt. They can just go straight to some of these more modern systems and immediately start reaping the benefit because their data structured from day one, as opposed to like, now I've got to go, if I'm a bigger city and I've got all this legacy data silos, I have to still break down those silos. I can't just, flip a switch and all of a sudden I get magical, AI data integrations. I still have to tackle the plumbing of that. And so I think we're going to actually see a resurgence of some of these smaller communities, which make up the vast majority of cities across the country. We're going to see a resurgence of them leapfrogging technology potential using AI and not having the technical debt that's held down the others.
So you and the team at eRepublic recently launched the Center for Public Sector AI at the end of last year, I believe. What prompted this initiative, and what do you hope to achieve through it?
Yeah, this was, 20 years ago, even before my time at eRepublic, we launched the Center for Digital Government to help usher in the e-government era, what we call Government 2.0, for those of you that remember those phrases. And that was really about helping government understand technology in the .com era, the e-government era, and how they could use things like the internet as a mechanism of delivering services and reaching potential, constituents. As we looked at what was happening with AI, we felt like this was more than a technology. This was a monumental shift. This was a general purpose technology transformation that was happening that needs new guidance. And so while the Center for Digital Government is still focused on all of the important aspects of, foundation technologies like identity and cloud and other things, government agencies needed a new vehicle that they could use to navigate this moment, to navigate a playbook that doesn't exist for this moment in time. And so it was just as disruptive as the internet, but the timelines were collapsing and compressing, and it was becoming more evident that something needed to happen and we needed more structure in the market. And it's been great to see how the market has evolved and the emergence of these groups and associations. So we took kind of our platform of state and local government leaders, both on the tech side and the business side, and said, we need to connect them with knowledge, and we need to research and understand what's happening in this moment, and we need to inform that to the market. And so we launched it in December and really used it as a vehicle to do just that, right? Let's analyze what's happening and put that out free. Like, let's have no barriers of entry. We all need to learn from the knowledge. Let's write about it and cover it and tell the best cases and the best practices so we can all learn from it together. Let's recognize those use cases. Let's form a group of all of the key individuals that are involved in navigating this and learn from them. What works, what doesn't work, how are they procuring it? What are the challenges that they're seeing? And let's figure out how to kind of leverage the machine of that platform to solve those challenges. I mean, there's a lot of elephants in the room, right? We've got, ethics, we've got bias, we've got, we can go down a whole list of all those things. And the only way to tackle them is to start a conversation about it. And it can't just be done, in a vacuum or at a conference. It's got to be done continuously. And so this was really stood up to try to help agencies embrace this moment, not be disrupted by it. And I like to, leverage the Uber analogy of disruptive technology, right? When you think about when Uber was rolling out across the country, they were a disruptive technology of that moment. And many government agencies blocked them and they banned them. And they said, no, we don't understand what box you fit. You're not a taxi. We don't know where you are, right? And so the ones that banned them and blocked them actually suffered because they didn't understand what they were trying to regulate. And not to say that they were, a magical technology that didn't need regulation, but the best way to understand and regulate something is to use it and to actually understand the nuances of it. And so the agencies that did the best during this time created regulatory sandboxes, and they allowed these disruptive technologies like ride sharing companies to operate so they can learn from it. And I think we're going through that same moment where initially there was like, oh man, we're going to have to block this. There was a state that banned, ChatGPT. That's not how you understand something new. You have to lean in. And so I think a big part of this center was that we wanted to help not go that, route that we went with Uber, and have no question that AI is definitely going to play a major role in the future of how government functions and works. But let's confront the elephants in the room and do it in a safe way that makes it acceptable.
Exactly. That's something that we sort of espouse here at the Humanity Code as well. Just that if we're preventing people from understanding it, then we're not going to be shaping it in the best possible way. I think about students in school, being banned from leveraging it, and that's going to make them less useful, but also it'll prevent them from being part of shaping where AI goes. So to pull up on that thread that you were talking about, some of the concerns. So as AI is more broadly adopted, so are the concerns about its use. And government is particularly risk averse, and thankfully so. What are the top concerns that you're hearing about from government leaders, whether, ethics, data privacy, and fairness? And what are they doing about it? How are they kind of doing that balancing?
There's so many, and this is a moving target. We asked them actually in a recent survey instrument through the Center for Public Sector AI, what were their most pressing concerns? What are the things that, kind of keep them up at night, so to speak? And so top concerns, ethical use, from our group. We saw 60% of respondents across state and local say that was a top concern. Data privacy, data quality, bias and fairness, and cybersecurity. But I think there's a parallel to this too. And that's where we looked at, okay, well, what is actually holding them back from implementing? So we know that the concerns are there, but what we actually saw here was flipped. So those concerns weren't holding them back from pulling the trigger. The number one thing was a lack of staff with AI-related skills or knowledge. They didn't have the institutional knowledge on where to start and where to begin and how to use these things. Then we get into the data security, privacy concerns, lack of policies, budgetary limitations, kind of what it fits. But I think, there's a workforce kind of story to this too, as it comes down to how these disruptive technologies ultimately hit, public sector agencies. And they're complicated, right? I mean, we've got civil service and a lot of agencies. We've got, some of the fears of automation and the replacement of job functions. And there's a lot of things that do have to be confronted as a part of that. But I think that, we have to start a conversation. We have to try to figure out how to navigate that and how to work through it and acknowledge that, yes, we know that inherently, like especially in a lot of the consumer grade, language models, there's a lot of bias because these models are trained on the internet, and the internet is not necessarily the best training source for some of this. So
it's a reflection of us.
It's a reflection of humanity, and we have to find ways to weed that out. We also know privacy is important. I mean, look at what's happened in Europe with GDPR, and you've got fragmented privacy legislation across the U.S., where states like California and Texas and others have their own privacy policies. We don't have a national equivalent of GDPR, but where does AI fit and what's government's role in that process? And, if the feds haven't connected the dots, what are the states going to do? So, right, there's so much that's kind of happening here But I think a lot of it just goes down to kind of a lack of, understanding on, how these technologies work, the whole AI black box challenge, right? And that's where we want to educate these leaders that are regulating the tech and the leaders that may be looking at opportunities to leverage this technology to augment their, employees, what it is, what it can do, what the limitations are, but also what the capabilities are to get immediate value today. So I think there's both sides that have to be balanced, but the only way you're going to find it is by leveraging it, by using it, by
Yeah.
putting it into use cases where you can kind of do that in a safe way, right? You want guardrails. You don't want to have, people in a social safety net organization that are throwing, for private information into a
Right.
model that isn't protected. But there's safe ways to experiment, just like we saw with some of the other disruptive innovations over time. And I think that's where we're at now, is just kind of starting to put those guardrails in place. And we're seeing a lot of pilots pop up there.
So, in terms of some of those guardrails and regulations, what are you seeing in terms of the new or proposed regulations that are being implemented at the state and local level? And where do they see themselves fitting in vis-a-vis federal? And, in some ways, when I think about it, it's kind of silly to have disparate policies because AI models don't have borders that stop at state lines. So how do you see that balance? And how do they see their role vis-a-vis Fed? And then how do they balance that with the innovation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the bigger widespread challenge is how you define AI that you're trying to regulate, because there's so many. I mean, AI is not new, as we both know, and goes back decades, from a use case standpoint. And we've had facial recognition and all kinds of different aspects that are more controversial. But then all of a sudden we had generative AI, get on this media hype circle, and it's kind of dominated the conversation. But from a regulatory standpoint, AI is one thing. It's black or white. It doesn't have all the subdomains. And I think that's what's one of the biggest challenges that we've seen from a state standpoint, is they're regulating the category when they're trying to regulate the generative subcomponents of it versus the entire thing. So, we saw as a trend last year, every state and large city was, pushing forth certain types of regulations just to put some bare guardrails in place. And a lot of it was focused on, data utilization, like not putting any type of private information or PII into these models, not leveraging consumer models for government work, things like records retention, right? If I prompt something, how am I saving the prompt so that if someone, FOIAs me for a record or does a freedom of information request, I can produce that. And I can't do it if it's a model that I don't control and if it's a platform that isn't, authorized. I think a lot of the governors issued executive orders. We went through a whole flurry where they were like, okay, we know that this is here and we need to figure it out. So a lot of the states went through, and many of them are still here, inventorying their existing AI systems or any type of automated decision-making system, understanding how it works, what it does, understanding what aspect of AI it's leveraging, and then figuring out what from a guardrail standpoint should be put into formal policy. The one good thing is we've seen cities like Boston and Seattle and others that have basically been versioning their internal policies, which I think is a smart model, because as technology changes, I mean, we can't even stick to certain names of these products.
Yeah, right.
Changing the names all the time. So it's like,
How often are they reviewing it, have you found?
from a best practices standpoint, we are encouraging that agencies do it at least every quarter at a minimum, because it is moving so quick. And we're seeing evolutionary leaps in how some of these models work that are changing things significantly. And so I think, the annual reviews of these types of things is no longer enough. Now you have to iterate on them quarterly. You have to look at how things have changed. You have to understand, even like the ways that you're seeing. I mean, like when you look at AI intersect existing software, one of the most disruptive aspects of the commercialization of AI in government is that you may not actually buy it. It may just come over through a software update.
Right.
And all of a sudden I have new functionality. It's just like when you buy a Tesla, you can buy a software update, get self-driving, capabilities. And all of a sudden you have a highly controversial aspect that has to cross a lot of different regulatory constructs. The same is true with this, right? It might be a city that's leveraging a CRM that all of a sudden, boom, I have an update and I have these capabilities. And so what am I doing internally to de-risk and to provide assurances on how I'm going to use, the public's information, employee information? What role does that output have in my decision-making process, right? These are the things that we have to confront and understand. Where does this intersect? How does this fit? And how can we use this to augment that potential dynamic as opposed to replacing work or discretion that should be human in the loop, right? I mean, we see human in the loop as a fundamental aspect of how we drive these systems forward, to your, kind of be the prompt dynamic. That's the most critical piece in all of this. So how
Right.
do we redesign processes that leverage that as a component?
The specificity that you mentioned a bit ago about the need to be specific around the type of AI that you're talking about. How, and I know the Center for Public Sector AI is trying to address this, but at this point, how much do you think many of the government leaders understand that?
I would say from an IT leader standpoint, they get it. But the problem is IT doesn't always set the level of policy that we're talking about, because we're looking at the legislative sides of state government where they're passing policy and they're not always grounded in the reality of how the technology works. And so I think that's where there's a disconnect at times with how these things actually function and what it is we're trying to regulate. The good news is a lot of the initial policies were focused on creating some type of governance, whether it's an AI council or task force that is focused on assembling a body of experts that understand how the technology works to propose future legislation to regulate. So I think we are seeing, some deconflicting of that just by trying to build this into the governance process of it. But there are some, even at the city level that have passed policies that are black and white and defining what these types of things are. And I think we have to be careful with that. And we have to, find ways to ensure that we're being very specific as to what we're defining as AI going forward. I also think longer term, as we think about redesigning these systems, policy may be set top down, but innovation is bottoms up, as we both know. And we have to find ways to take those individuals that are in most impacted job sets, not by job replacement of technology, but by task augmentation of technology. We have to take those people and plug them into the process of redesigning where we go. As we look at future training programs and other things, we might have top to bottom deployments of that, but the real utilization of it and real diffusion of that has to be bottoms up. So it has to be designed by and for the people that are in areas that are most impacted by task augmentation with AI. So I also think we need to kind of balance that, because it can be very easy to be prescriptive at the top level with regulations and policy and templates and other things, but that doesn't go anywhere. I mean, even our own internal use, we put out our own policy, but I made sure that we had a video that went alongside it that actually said, don't interpret this that someone did something dumb and got fired for it.
Right.
This is here to protect you and to protect the company, but we want you to experiment. And these are just guardrails, right? So I think we have to also add context into what we're trying to do, because people often see these types of policy updates as, oh, someone did something wrong, can't replicate that. And they just need to understand, no, this is just a new era. Things are moving so quickly. And so here's what it means. And here's your role in it. And here's what we want you to do.
How are you seeing the public responding to the use of AI in governments, or just the fact that, as you said, AI is in the tools that governments use, whether they choose it or not? Are there common concerns or even areas of excitement maybe that you've noticed, or any other notable shifts?
I mean, I think that there's some fear associated with how AI systems might enter into more critical aspects of government service delivery, right? Like, is it ready to run a water or sewer treatment facility? No, there's some fundamental infrastructure things we have to set up for backup and redundancy and things like that. But I would say the public's response, actually, interestingly enough, is they're using it to interface with government today. So rather than, thinking about their perception of government use, they're going, right now to some of these consumer-oriented models and saying, hey, what does this mean? Or they're taking pictures of parking signs. Can I park here? Or they're getting that speeding ticket that they got and they're plugging it in saying, give me 5 ways that I can fight this speeding ticket. And then they're printing it out. So they're using AI already to interface with government agencies, whether the agencies have authorized it or know it. That doesn't matter. They're using it as kind of back to that experience use case to interface with agencies. And I think that's where the opportunity for government is to think about those uses and how they interface with that. How can I, instead of relying on people and expecting them to go to my website, how can I bring more of my service deliveries so that it plugs into models that they might be using, or that it's an application, or a plugin or whatever it might be as these types of technologies, continue to evolve. How do I embed it where they're at as opposed to just building something and expecting them to come? I mean, there's 19,000 cities in the US alone. The vast majority have a population of 25,000 or less. Each one probably has a website. And if I'm a constituent and I'm trying to figure out the rules or regulations associated with where I'm at, I mean, that's, where am I going to go? Well, I'm going to probably leverage generative AI now and say, hey, what are the rules about XYZ? And it's scraped, some legislative database within that city and has pulled them together, right? So I think, or I might take a government document in and say, hey, I just got this letter in the mail.
What does this mean?
Right. Yeah. What does this mean? I got this legalese letter about a business is being rezoned. Like, should I be worried about this? So I think people are leveraging the technology as a way to interface with agencies today because it helps translate and humanize, and break down some of those, bureaucratic layers for them. That's where I would say agencies have an opportunity to further, evolve and figure out how they can leverage some of that to meet citizens at least halfway.
Shifting gears a bit and looking outside the U.S. for a moment, because this is, very, very much global, and there's not state boundaries, there's not national boundaries for any of the AI models by and large. So as you were an Eisenhower Fellow and you spent some time in China and had the opportunity to get up close and personal with China, and granted, this was before generative AI landed in everyone's laps, but what are your thoughts on China's current approach to AI? Where do you see them fitting in kind of the global scene? And how do you think their policies will be influencing global standards for better or worse?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed the time and the opportunity I had through my Eisenhower Fellowship in China and was able to kind of see both at a national and kind of a city level how they were approaching technology. They're incredibly centralized, as we know, so that makes it much easier to standardize and to roll out global policy changes. I mean, some of the problems we're trying to confront with data standardization, for example, are negated there because there's one kind of standard that is laid down for everybody to follow. And not saying that we mirror that here in the US, but saying that it provides a very unique opportunity when you've structured data in a way at a, kind of national level to be able to latch a technology like AI on top of that and extract insights. I mean, that's one pillar of that. I would say what was interesting is that we all have the same challenges, right? They're looking for guidance on standards. They're dealing with some of the same challenges related to bias and other types of things that we're still confronting here. And that there's so much that we can learn from each other as we think about collaborating on international standards for certain types of things, right? We have NIST and we have other types of things. There's IEEE. There's so many different flavors of how we're approaching it. And my research there was focused on smart cities. And one of the biggest findings was we all have a different definition of smart cities, right? It's just like how we're approaching AI today. We're all taking different viewpoints of it and what we need to tackle. And I think there's an opportunity to really think about this is a humanity changing technology. And how do we start to put politics aside and focus on, keeping human in the loop, keeping, this technology as a way to augment human potential? How do we solve that collectively? And how can we leverage it at such a massive scale through international collaboration to tackle some of these very, big, hairy and audacious, goals that we have when it comes to removing bias and thinking about ethics and other types of things? I think these are collective shared challenges that we shouldn't just do in our petri dish. We need to find ways to collaborate. And so there was an openness on that side, I think, to do that. And I know that there's a lot of dialogues and collaborations that are happening across the world related to smart cities. But I think, now this technology is here and it's impacting us and people are using it. And BYO AI is very real. People are bringing their own AI models into work and into school and into everything else. And so I think, that's why I'm so excited about what you're doing, because we have a window of time to shape this narrative.
It's not a long one.
And part of that is not doing it just with ourselves. We have to
right
bridges and to collaborate and to expand that dialogue and to address the elephants in the room. I would say this isn't an opportunity for, the conferences with the shiny marketing graphics talking about what AI is going to do, right? There's plenty of that.
Right.
AI,
shiny efficiency and
I want to do an event that goes deeper and talks about like, what is this? So that's why I think this is important. These dialogues are important because we don't all have the answers, but the answer is somewhere. It's in the room
Yeah,
from us as a collective, not us as an individual.
absolutely. This collaboration that you touched upon, that's actually kind of a founding premise for the Humanity Code, just recognizing that in an ideal world, there would be some kind of a supranational global council of sorts that has, not just geographic difference in representation, but, across different disciplines and not just the usual disciplines like, technology and ethics, but art and, other things that we may not think about, but that are representative of the human experience. So yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, we know we can do it. We just did
Right.
COVID-19. I mean, you think about
Yes.
international, collaboration and, politics aside, it required a lot of different parts and it mobilized the entire collective to respond to the moment. And I think, although this isn't a public health crisis, this is a moment that we have to respond to because, there is a very, very tight window of time before some of the stuff is defined for us. And so we have to shape that now.
Collaboration has actually been a common theme in your career as I think about it, both in how you operate. I know how you are just generally a very collaborative worker, but also you worked at companies that were all about collaboration like Spigot and Collab Lab. And are you beginning to see that type of consolidation of efforts among governments, whether it's within the US, whether it's cross-national, and are you seeing the kind of that cross-discipline where they're really bringing sort of the atypical viewpoints into the conversation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think there's definitely been significant areas of improvement, but there's still a lot to be confronted there, especially as we think internationally, right? I mean, even from level to level, I would say a lot of the consolidation, states are great at sharing best practices and what they're doing. But if you're a, city, you kind of don't always understand the state lingo and some of the work that you're doing may not translate as applicably to those levels. So I think part of the work that we do at eRepublic is to break down those barriers and to help share maybe a city's doing something from a management standpoint that should be, shared at a state level. We connect the dots and it doesn't matter what flavor of government you are. We want to make sure that we're sharing those best practices. I think that's happening more frequently in the US markets and in some of these other pockets, but there is an opportunity to connect those pockets together and to learn from some of the work that they're doing. It's been so fun to follow what's happening in the UK, what's happening in Latin America, and even in, some of, the more impoverished parts of the country, GovTech is global. It is a global dynamic. It is a global marketplace. And we are all collectively trying to navigate this together. I mean, there's government institutions that are navigating the same challenges overseas that we are here in the US. So I think there's so much opportunity for those types of conversations and dialogues and collaborations. And so although it's starting to happen, I would say we need to do it a lot more and we need to focus on sharing those. And I'd love to learn more about what other individuals in the world are doing so we can share it with the US market and learn from that together. So it's starting, but we need to do it more and we need to do it fast.
That's what keeps me up at night. So to close us out, at the Humanity Code here, we invite everyone to be the prompt in ensuring that we have a positive future with AI. I literally believe that everyone does have a role to play, if not an obligation. You have a strong and influential voice within state and local government. What would you say to anyone working in government, whether they're in technology or not, on how they can be the prompt for a better future with AI?
I think, two words, act now. Whether you're small, whether you're big, this is not something you sit on the sidelines for and wait for someone else to figure it out. This is something that is happening simultaneously to everybody at every industry, every individual, every persona. This is a collective challenge that only the collective can navigate. And everyone plays a role in that. And I would say there's no playbook for right now. The playbook is being written by everyone that is in, this moment. but it's not going to be driven from the top down. It's going to be driven from the bottom up. And so I would say, regardless of who you are and what your pedigree is and where you work, this is an opportunity to lean in and to be a voice, because that's what we need. And you may not have the answers, but you may have a great way of framing the challenges, or you may have a certain perspective on something that helps us get closer. So I think we have to act collectively. We have to start with conversations and dialogues and barriers that have to be removed, both, geographically and in levels of government. This is a politics thing. So I would act now, and I would lean in and, test, experiment, read, consume. I mean, I try to challenge myself by viewing different viewpoints on it as I look at even like the impact to jobs. I read the good, the bad, the ugly, because I want to understand all sides of the equation so that I can at least present those and we can start to figure out where things intersect. But you have to start, and you can't sit on the sidelines, and you have to act. And you can't expect this to be solved by someone else. This is our moment. And so I would say for, everyone watching or listening, and, lean in and, share what you learn. I would love to hear it. Connect with me on LinkedIn, send me an email. And this also just isn't a government versus enterprise thing. This is confronting us all right now.
Right.
So, there might be lessons we can extract on both sides of that fence. But we have to be open and willing to do that. So that's what I would say, being a prompt. And I am super inspired by everything you're doing, Heidi, with this project. I think it's incredibly important, and the moment is now. So hopefully, someone listening out there will lean into this and get started.
Thank you so much, Dustin. I really appreciate you being here. And as always, you brought just incredible perspective into government. Keep doing the work that you're doing. It's so needed. And I know at the pace that you usually operate, you'll be helping government act now. So thanks for all you do.
Yeah, absolutely. It was an honor to join, and thanks for the time.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us on the Humanity Code Conversations. Remember, our future with AI is being written now and by us. Let's ensure it's a story that honors and elevates our shared humanity.